redlining had limited the ability of the black communities to get, you wouldn't come in and start a business there, it cost too much. You couldn't come in and do the kind of things that they did in Atlanta with Georgia State. Why were there no dorms over by the HBCUs? Why was there not all these dorms? There's plenty of college kids over there, right? Well, because it costs so much money to come in and do something or buy something and convert it because of redlining.
Welcome to the Disruptive Leadership Podcast, where we help leaders multiply their impact, income, and authority without burning out or relying on outdated strategies. Today's conversation is for anyone who wants to understand wealth from a different angle. Not just building businesses, but backing businesses. Not just earning income, but creating a legacy. Our guest is Karen Rand, and she is reshaping how you think about capitalism, investing, and access to opportunity. And today, we're going to break down how everyday people just like you can become financial backers and participate in what she calls the economic democratization of capital that is happening right now so that you can build generational wealth with intention, purpose, and compassion. Karen is going to tell us the story of Jane, so let's jump right into it. So I consider myself to be a compassionate capitalist. Compassionate about people, love helping those who need help. And then, of course, as a business owner, entrepreneur, capital. Like we all know it's important. We all need it. But until reading the book, I had never heard the two words brought together in terms of compassionate capitalist. What's your perspective or your take on being a compassionate capitalist, and why is that so important?
So when I first got introduced to angel investing and was invited into the room, right, and I ended up being mentored to take over the angel investor group that I ran. I remember meeting these investors for the first time, and I was not familiar with the term angel investor in my job at IBM, even though I was working with venture capitalists, and I had never actually heard the term. Right. I didn't unpack that till many years later, but I would talk to these angels and I would say, so how'd you become an angel investor? How'd you learn about this? And they were, and I remembered so distinctly the conversation with the first time I'd asked that, this guy says, oh, well, I got invited to a meeting and because he had exited his company, had a little money, and he said, and I lost money on my first 3 deals and I started to figure it out. And, I thought, wow, that is really, you got to have something else going on besides just wanting to make money if you're going to get in. And, the average check for national average for accredited angel investors is $25K. So let's say that's $75K. You're throwing, and usually within a year, when people are first getting started, doing 3 in a year is not that hard to do on those, even on the big side. And he said, and I thought, wow, you got to have serious fortitude, serious passion for what you're doing to go through that gauntlet, lose money. Now you don't lose it right away, but still to lose money and stick with it. Right. And so, I had originally heard those 2 words together with a book that, Rich DeVos wrote, or J. Van Andel, the founders of Amway, was the compassionate capitalist. Their view of it was helping people create these small businesses, so that they could, so it was a different context, right? But the words together, I said, that's what an angel investor is. They expect to make money. They don't do this because they're just philanthropic, but they do this because they're passionate about the problem that they're solving. And I was even talking to a guy yesterday. We were talking about investing in things that, that start decades before. Where, like VR headsets, for example, they've been around for a long time, right? Till they're now what people kind of take for granted and kids use them and everything, right? And so, the ones with really a lot of money, lead the way in investing in new tech that the market's not ready for, but it evolves, right? And they're investing in the future of a problem that they want to solve because they're passionate about that problem they want to solve. So when I first started using the term, it was during the Great Recession. And I had a lot of investors just had their money on the sidelines. And I was like, the best way to turn this economy around is start investing in these entrepreneurs, these people that are going to be creating the new jobs for the new markets, for the new, industries and things like that. The disruptors they're creating whole new sectors that will create jobs. And that's where we invest and start these things up. And, become a compassionate capitalist, put your money to work to turn things around. And I changed the name of my podcast back then with Southeast Private Equity Conference. It's called Spec Talk Radio because I had this big conference.
Mm-hmm.
And I said, I'm going to turn my radio, I'm going to make my radio the amplify this message and call it the Compassionate Capitalist Show, because it'll trigger the conversations. It'll be the reason why. And I had a really long definition of compassionate capitalist back then. It was like the people that invest time, money, knowledge, resources into entrepreneur endeavors to bring innovation to the market, create jobs, and create wealth for all those involved. I was like, I'm going to say that really fast, say that fast 3 times. And so then I just said, wait, it's a company that you're passionate about and you expect to make money. So compassionate capitalist, and that's where it is. And I stuck with it. It's my brand. And I really do believe that's the difference between buying and selling on the stock market, buying and selling on crypto, and even when it comes to buying and selling real estate.
For sure, for sure. Now, one of the things that you said often is problem solving. And I think a lot of people who, especially investors who are going to be new to the investing game and maybe, aren't entrepreneurs or business owners, they may not understand that problem solving is really all businesses, do. But there's a group of people out there, Karen, and not to get into politics by any stretch, but there are some folks who think that capitalism is, not a great economic market, that capitalists are just greedy people. What's your response to people who have that type of belief?
I mean, yeah, there are bad capitalists, right? That are greedy, and we see it now with the billionaires, right? Where they I have this favorite comedian, Josh Johnson, you might know him.
Yeah, I've heard of him.
And he did one of his segments, and it really hit home to me. It was about why billionaires buy another yacht. Right.
Okay.
And he was like, the however hundreds of millions of dollars or whatever they might do on that, or they buy another jet, or they buy another whatever. Why? You have a few billionaires, that like the Bill Gates of the world and that are capitalist, or, Buffett, right? That they say, I want to pay my fair share of taxes. I want to, be philanthropic. I want to put money into funds that do all these kind of things because I want to, have an impact with my money, and so, I think they're great examples, and I'd like to see where the other ones start to try to solve a problem. I mean, they may go, oh yeah, because if we go into space, we're going to solve this, that, or the other thing. But there's people on the earth that have problems. I see Bezos got this thing where you can do these real estate developments and you can get in for $100 and stuff like that. You got so much money. We got a housing shortage. Why not go and subsidize some of these housing to be able to, they don't have to be all about the capitalist side of building this thing up and making X amount of dollars. Let's just put some of this money to work solving these problems. And so, there's a kind of a parallel world of conscious capitalism that is more known and compassionate capitalism. And that is what I think business owners need to understand. It's that when you start to become very, very successful and you have the ability to run your company and treat your people the way a normal, nice person would do, right? Right? It's a shame that at Walmart, as big as it is, that the workers at Walmart have to be on food stamps, right? I mean, why can't you pay? You make enough money, you can pay your people more. So conscious capitalism says you're going to pay your people good, you're going to treat them right, you're going to treat your vendors right. There's enough money to go around, and if you as the president of a bank make 100 times what your teller makes, that's a problem, right? And so, that we have to sort of change that mindset. Shareholders are the ones in those public companies that have the ability to change the mindset when they understand it. We saw it with some of these environmental, like changing it where a lot of environmental people got majority shares, got board seats because they voted for themselves into board seats. And then they changed, the climate impact that a petroleum company would have, right? I mean, so shareholders can do that in the big companies where those billionaires are made, but it's where it's at the grassroots level where people can have an impact on solving some of those problems that make our life better, more affordable building materials, so you can build affordable, nice housing, right? You can get clean water anywhere because there are solutions out there for that. Investing in that, we create economies of scale so they're more affordable to other people. I mean, capitalism is the buying of selling something that because somebody wants it and they're willing to pay. Now they can build it for this and they're willing to pay more, so there's a profit margin in there for the company to pay their employees. So capitalism is the natural order of that.
Right.
The alternatives for that are where like people just work and they don't have autonomy to create their own, fulfill their dreams. That's the opposite of capitalism, and it's the worst,
Yeah,
right? I mean,
absolutely.
bad capitalism will create that kind of feeling in people,
Right.
but a good capitalist society allows, somebody with an idea of a problem that gets solved to actually be able to go do it. And I think America is unique in a way that we have this kind of entrepreneurism is sort of our DNA. My thing is, don't quit your day job if you got good benefits, because right now that's really, but like that's worth almost as much as your salary.
Absolutely.
And and take that little extra money you got that you were going to do something else or save it up and put it to work. It's all helping more businesses get going, that they can spend more money in the community. They can do, everybody in the community thrives if we help solve the problem on the entrepreneur side and the innovation side.
I love it. I love it. So obviously, we know that creating or businesses are started to solve problems, and businesses, ideally, you want to become a business owner who creates wealth. In the book, you talk about how, yes, starting a business is the best way or one of the best ways to create wealth, but being the financial backer of those businesses is maybe the second best way or one of the better ways to do it. What led you to that belief, and what is your advice to someone who maybe is still working that full-time job, has a 401k, or maybe came into some kind of lump sum, whether it's insurance policy or whatever, and they're going, you know what? I do have some extra capital that I want to, put to work for me to go out and make some little baby
Yeah.
monies for me. What's your advice to those people?
So first off, on the entrepreneur side of it, it is hard to be an entrepreneur and break through having being just a lifestyle to being something that can scale and exit rich.
Yes,
It
it
is
is.
hard. It takes time. It takes money. It takes, sometimes fractured relationships. You don't
Yeah,
get to do a lot of the stuff that you do with your family. You
yeah,
miss out on things because
yeah.
you're, having to do this and the other. And when you're first starting out, you're doing all the jobs, right? And so it's hard to be an entrepreneur, but we have this, like I say, it's sort of part of the DNA system, right? And our and we have, because we start in high school, right? And we start taught, with different programs that, all the way through, people are getting the hints or the messages that, financial independence, prosperity, all this stuff is being an entrepreneur.
Mm,
They see celebrity billionaires, all that, they see this kind of stuff and they're like that, I'm going to strive. I can't be a professional athlete, and I don't have that, but maybe I can be a successful entrepreneur,
mm,
right? And the reason why they don't think about the other people is because of the fact that it was such a secret. It was against the law. This is where the Jobs Act comes in, right?
yeah,
And I know we're going to get to that. It was such a secret, and this is what the thing that I figured out, not at the moment that I walked into that room the first time when I left IBM and I got invited to this angel group. It was years later that I truly understood that the people that were in the room were the ones that were picking and choosing who was going to be the next big thing. Like it's
mm,
just like, we watch Shark Tank, right? And we watch it for its entertainment value, and that's a whole nother thing, right? But they still are picking. They're still
hmm,
choosing those companies that they're going to put the money in. And sometimes because there's so many more companies raising capital than there are investors, it makes it even harder to be a successful entrepreneur, because having capital before in order to invest in your business to get to revenue,
right,
and then to bridge the gap until your revenue comes in to pay for things,
right,
it is a necessary part of that. And whether you do it with debt, equity, or some kind of a thing, it is part of any kind of startup that begins to scale. And
absolutely.
so I realized that because I wrote about this in my first book because one of the Microsoft stories is that when they went public, they created a 100,000 millionaires
Oh,
or
wow.
something like
I know they
that
created a
because
lot. I
some of
didn't
the
know the number.
employees as well as their early investors and stuff like that, some huge number
Right.
of millionaires, right? It's in the resource package that comes with the course and with the book. I have the original Wall Street Journal when I went article when Microsoft went public and talked about all the millionaires that they created.
Right.
And I said, you know what? That's true. We see these headlines of these big tech billionaires, and we never talk about the fact that there was probably 1,000 by the time they got to that point. When you look at the not the original angels that stroked their own check, all the way to the VCs that took other people's money and put it to work, that they still got a return, right? A lot of people made a lot of money when that entrepreneur became a billionaire,
Right.
right? They made a lot of money on it. And one of the examples I use, well, I'll come back to it when we get into the Jobs Act thing, but that's the thing. When I realized, it was like, okay, so if it takes 10 years to build a successful business to exit rich over that period, and it might take you, $100,000 of your own money, right? And all the time that you got to put in, it's not a 40-hour week job,
Right.
right? It's
Right.
a lot more hours than that if you're going to start up a business, or you could take your extra money, the money you might be saving up for real estate, right? You realize, oh, that 50 grand's not enough. I can't buy a portfolio of 5 houses anymore,
Right.
particularly if you're going to, and the risk is really high we saw in the Great Recession, if you own it with a bank.
Right.
And so, I could take that money, and over 5 years or 10 years, and the money I would be putting into a mortgage payment on that rental property, I could put that into a company every month, and could have a portfolio of 100 companies
Yeah.
where all those entrepreneurs are working really, really, really hard to pursue their dream of getting, building it up, and you're just giving them the money.
Yep.
You can always make more money. Right? If you're figured out how to make money in your job, or you're a successful traditional business owner.
Right.
And sometimes, I've heard entrepreneurs, they kind of like, I just like building, right? And then they get bored and they don't want to keep going. So they like might sell it prematurely, or they do stuff. It's like, keep your jazz going by investing in other businesses, taking your excess cash and just start putting it to work. And the other ones that are, give them a lift up and, mentor them a little bit, give them money, be a compassionate capitalist. And, you have one successful company, and you can be a part of 10, 15 other companies that are on their track to become successful.
For sure. So you're getting into, and you brought it up a little bit, the democratization of capital markets, right? And so, I mean, I love the idea, because I do believe that it creates more access and more opportunity, for entrepreneurs and business owners. Can you will you go a little bit more in details about, what democratization,
Yeah, I know. It's a
I'm
tongue
gonna get it
twister, isn't it?
together, of capital markets, and why you believe like that's the greatest way to close the wealth gap?
Okay, so that term, I heard that term first right after the Jobs Act was passed. And for your listeners, the Jobs Act was legislation in 2012 passed pretty much unanimously by the House and the Senate, and signed into law by President Obama. And it was in response to the coming out of the Great Recession, because entrepreneurs really, the banks were, the financial markets were messed up. Banks were hard pressed to lend because of other legislation that had happened at the very end of the Clinton administration, called the Modernization of Securities Modernization Act, something like that. That it was where they allowed financial institutions to do mortgages and financial planning and all this thing under one house. It had been
Mm.
broken up, and then they brought it all back into one house, because what could be bad with that, right? And
Right.
and so what you ended up having was this muddled thing up, that the collapse of the mortgage business, because of selling notes and things like that, and this other stuff, just it became this ripple effect. So at the time, for people that that may not, maybe their parents went through it. That was kind of what was part of Jane's story, because she saw her parents go through losing their rental properties. But a lot of people lost most of their retirement because a lot of people really just had 401ks at that time, and so the 401ks were just in market, across the markets. They weren't in individual stocks, but the markets were all collapsed. So people lost their 401ks, they lost their retirement, they lost the value of rental properties. And so people had, were really struggling because, what was they saw their retirement
Just
evaporate.
evaporate. Yeah.
And so there was that problem. Entrepreneurs couldn't get bank loans. The investors weren't investing, right? And reward-based crowdfunding, which is what a lot of people think of as crowdfunding still today. I'm going to jump ahead on a question. That's where
Great.
people, you GoFundMe is one where people do donations. Kickstarter is and Indiegogo are the most known reward-based ones, and that's where people give money, to a company in reward for something. They're going to get a product, or if they're doing a movie, they're going to get credits, or they might get invited to a screening, or they're like excited about something, but it's very emotional. They want this thing, right? So that had been proven to be pretty successful, because some pretty big companies that fast forward had raised money that way, right? And through reward based. So at the time, our very first smartwatches, 3D printers, drones, the VR headsets, Oculus, all came to market with reward-based crowdfunding. Okay. No equity, but people said, oh, that would be really cool to have this 3D printer that I could like make whatever, earrings or something. I don't know, make stuff, right? And they put whatever, couple $1,000 into that, and they'd get a product. So in my first book, I used the Oculus headset as an example. Is that in the Congress trying to figure this out, they look at this and they say, okay, so if somebody put $1,000 into getting this early version of a VR headset that this kid did in his garage, right? You know what I mean? And then fast forward years later, and all of these examples of drones and things, they all got venture capital type money later on and went
Right.
on to have exits. The most notable was Zuckerberg buying this kid's company for $800 million, right? So the thing says, okay, all right, so why do we limit people's ability to invest in entrepreneurs? We don't tell them that they can't go spend $500 a month on a lottery ticket. We don't tell them they can't go to Vegas or Atlantic City and throw down 10 grand on the craps table and lose it.
Right.
Right? We don't restrict their ability to do things that are actual gambling. Why are we saying they can't? But they could go put $1,000 and buy an Oculus headset, and 5 years later, what do they got? They got a piece of obsolete piece of whatever that doesn't even work on any kind of technology anymore.
Right.
They had $1,000 of equity. What would that be worth? Would that be 8,000? Would it be 80,000? With that 800 million acquisition,
Right.
what would that be worth?
What does that look like?
It's hard to we don't know, because we didn't allow it.
Right.
So maybe we stop restricting it and we do something where, because when you look at stock market and crypto, the only restriction is nothing about income. It's only about 18 years old, right? That's the only thing you got to do in order to do any of those other ones. So we put all these rules on investing in entrepreneurs, and entrepreneurs need this capital. And it's hard to be an entrepreneur, and there's more entrepreneurs than there is money. So, wait, if millionaires have been doing this for decades when it was against the law, you had to, it was really on the entrepreneur. The entrepreneur had to know the millionaire or go through a broker dealer or an angel group to get to the millionaires. They couldn't just go out and say, hey, anybody want to invest, right? Why don't we let people get their customers that love their product to be able to invest in them? Why don't we allow that? Right? And so they came together and they came up for two things. One was very early stage. Reg CF has been used for a lot of different things now. It's not just for pure startups, but they have the 4 different ways to raise capital from a crowd: direct public offerings. Real quick, it's interest state exemption. Georgia's got the best law out there, IGE, Invest Georgia exemption, that I'm promoting all the time in my economic resilience, community-based finance stuff.
Okay.
You got Reg CF, which is sort of the one that most people kind of know of as crowdfunding. That's in both cases, it's $5 million from any accredited or unaccredited investors. One is in the state, crowdfundings across the country. Then you have the old way, the traditional way that companies raise capital, which is a Reg D 506 is what they call it. And they split it into two. B is the way they still do it today through angel groups. C is you can general solicit, but they have to prove that they're accredited investors. It's sort of the wild, wild west right now because of the way the rules are pretty loosey goosey in that area. And then you got Reg A Plus, which was solving the other side of it. It was really, really hard for companies to go public and companies that were pretty good, but they weren't the big high flying tech companies. And it costs so much money in the traditional way to go public. Why can't we provide a pathway to go public? And, the way it's architecting the rise to be a trading company, but let's let them use this to raise capital in a way that sets the stage up for them to be a public company and have an exit. And so the Jobs Act provides all of that on the company side and provides a way, which is what I talk about in the book with Jane, is a way for you to build a portfolio where it can be, this community based that might be some kind of fixed term loan or revenue share, to the ones that are going to be some kind of high tech company with potential big returns, to a steady Freddy kind of a thing where it's the later stage, with the Reg A Plus,
Gotcha.
right? A guy I was interviewing, he's going to be on my podcast, and he said that what he does now is they have a fund and they go in and buy, because employees can sell their stock if they've owned it or after 2 years. And they go out and buy these companies that are poised to go in public. They're not doing a Reg A Plus or a traditional unicorn, whatever. And they buy the equity at a discount from the employees and they get their shares. So then they're later stage, but it's the least amount of return, but the least risk as well. So they de-risked it because they're right near the end. The company's profitable. They're all this kind of stuff, right? They're not putting the money into the company. They're doing that. And it's like, so those are, those were the ways it was like, we can provide a pathway for those people that lost their retirement to accelerate their ability to generate income from their investments and profit from their investments in this new way, and also solve the problem of entrepreneurs, getting access to capital. Both sides of the table, both sides of the coin win, right? And the country wins.
Yeah.
Right. And so that was, to me, the beauty of the Jobs Act. And I probably have glamorized it a lot more than those people back then say. But hey, you say it enough times, right?
Hey man, I think someone has to jump up and down on their soapbox if we want to get the message out there. And so, I mean, one of the reasons when I came across your event and I saw the title of your book, I was like, I have to be in the room with her because she's doing something that I know myself. I wish I had someone, a mentor at one point. So like, for example, when I bought my very first business, I'll tell you, Karen, I didn't have any mentorship. I didn't have any guidance. I did my own research, read a couple of books. And I think it was, looking back, of course, hindsight 2020, you can always do that. No regrets at all.
Right.
But I realized, like, as an investor, if I would have had someone who could sit down with me and explain to me how I can put my money to, use and not make some of the mistakes that I've made, life is different, right? Everything is different. So the biggest mistake that I know I made is I didn't really understand due diligence, at the time. And I didn't understand what to look for, like what was important, what wasn't important. Yes, the business was profitable and bringing in cash, and that's all I, kept my attention and focus on. So to help investors who, whether they're new, this is their first time putting their money, into a business, what are some of the things that you recommend to those investors who want to put their capital to work to look for in due diligence in terms of, hey, this is a good idea or a good project for me to support and back?
So I'm going to answer that question, Jay, in this way, because part of, I think, a mistake, due diligence becomes part of everything. But due diligence really, some people get, they'll kind of, it's the lemming effect, right? Oh, these other people invested in it, so it must be okay.
Gotcha.
Right? There's a lot of examples in history of money going after bad money. Like the company was already like derailing, right? But more people put more money in because of the numbers of the money that were in
They
there,
thought the money
right?
would solve the problem.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and Theranos is the one I was trying to
Mm.
think of, right? She like, and I look at that one. I did a podcast on that. That was the lady that went to jail for fraud because her technology, the blood testing technology, didn't really work.
Yeah, I haven't heard of that one.
But well, she raised a lot of big money from from people that just invested because some big VC person had been in it.
Gotcha.
But she wouldn't show anybody her intellectual property. Wouldn't show them the numbers. She wouldn't show a lot of things, which to me are big old red flags, particularly if you're doing big checks, right? And like
Gotcha.
that kind of thing, just because, right? Even though this is, and so the mistake. So the first thing is that investors have to understand, and every investor out there that is an active angel, I've done the thing myself, investing on emotion, right? They invest on emotion, and that is one of the kiss of death. So how do you
Yes.
avoid investing on emotion? And so I teach that in the Compassionalist Academy, and it's kind of in a tool that I provide that is, for screening and filtering and trying that you make a decision that if you hit a certain score, if you go forward, you're consciously knowing I'm choosing emotion
I'm avoiding the
over the
numbers.
subjective over the objective
Yeah.
on this, because I really believe in this entrepreneur. I really want to see, I'm going to invest in the evolution of this technology. If it, you just invest less than you would in something else. So, losing it, if you lose it, isn't as painful, right?
Right.
So, but part of the thing I teach is that because you can be, the reason why so often investors will get caught up in the emotion is they don't have a strategy of what they're going to invest in and how they're going to build their portfolio. So they see a deal and it's like the shiny object syndrome. Oh my God, that's so great. Oh, they're this charismatic leader. And here, look at this, oh, I can't believe nobody's ever thought of that problem before, solving that problem that way. I didn't even know that was a problem until I saw this presentation, and now I know the problem, and I think it's right. And they don't necessarily understand the industry. They don't understand the other part of it. So to me, the first step, and this is what Jane goes through, is figuring out, what do you care about? You got to figure out what you know. Like, what do I know? And there's earned knowledge and learned knowledge.
Right.
Earned is, what you went to school for, and then learned is learned is what you went to school for, and earned is what you live life and learn.
What you went through.
Right?
Yeah.
Okay. And you and that, whether it's hobbies, it's career paths, it's just, experiences where you grew up, just things that you don't even realize
Right.
Right?
Yep.
And so figuring out, and so the tool kind of helps you figure some of that stuff out. And so you figure out what you know. And then and from that, what is the problem that I want to see solved? So in Jane's example, because she's a nurse, there's this, almost everybody probably knows somebody that got sicker when they went into the hospital because of germs. They picked up something because of the germs in the hospital.
Right.
Right? Like everybody, I know I have a few stories, not directly in my household, but, friends of friends and things like that. And so she's a nurse, so she sees it. She's like, why is it in this day and age, can't we have, where we don't transmit germs from one patient room to another patient room? Why is that, right?
Right.
So she starts trying to figure that out, and she does eventually figure that out. And I talk about how she figures out, but part of the premise is that when there's a problem that you want to solve, clean water, atmospheric water generators, right? It's a technology that is out there in lots of different forms now, right? Getting water out of the air, and processing and clean, kind of things, right? So there's problems that you want to see solved. So you find a company that's doing it, and before you invest, you go find 3 other companies. Or at least get 3 companies that are solving the same problem in different ways.
Gotcha.
And this is where crowdfund investing has an advantage over traditional angel investing. Because traditional angel investing only has the companies that walk into the room that applied on their website and went through the screening. And usually they're just what's happening in their own backyard. They might have a regional perspective, but usually it's local. They don't know, like in Atlanta, that somebody in Charlotte solving the problem, or in Detroit is solving the problem. Right? Whereas on crowdfunding, you subscribe to a couple different sites, and you can see this guy's on Detroit, this one's in, like you can see the companies that are solving it. And so that's the first step, right? So then, the high level of it is, does their solution make sense? Do they have traction on it? Those kind of things. There's like sort of a checklist that I do that I can make available to, your audience called the red flag checklist. It's what I would screen companies for the angel investor group and what I would look for.
Okay.
But the very first thing I do, so like the very first, there's the emotional, like what I know, this makes sense, it doesn't make sense, and you can do a quick little elimination. But the thing that I say is that the numbers never lie.
Yep.
Okay. And so when you look at the numbers, and people that have been doing angel investing for a long time kind of take it for granted on stuff, right? They don't dig into them, but I always dig into the numbers because I want to know. I recognize that every business model is different, right? Depending on your sector, what your solution is, your life cycle of how long it takes to sell that product, what your cost of goods going to be on that product. Do you have to go through a committee of a board to decide, or you get directly to the decision maker? Like, what is the sales process? Because it has a timeline on it. And if their business doesn't reflect that ebb and flow of that, then they don't really understand how they're going to sell the product. And that is a huge red flag, because that means what you don't want to do when you're investing this way is have a company figuring things out on your dime.
Yeah.
You want them to have figured it out. And if they don't have the money to figure it out exactly, they at least know that there's a problem. And they have an assumption. This is what we know. And these are the assumptions, and it may change. They're acknowledging it. They're not locked in stone. The kiss of death on the financials is when you have the two things. One, the revenue goes up in a steady cycle, right? There's always seasonality. There's always ebb and flow. If you're bringing out a new product, you get a bump in revenue. Real numbers go they go up, and they're not like a hockey stick.
They're like a stair step.
Right? Yeah.
Yeah.
The hockey stick thing is always, VCs laugh about the hockey stick, but that's the thing. That's where somebody says, and they'll say in a presentation, well, if we just get 1% of this big market, this is how. Well, that's what they've done. They just did a percentage thing and multiplied it every quarter or whatever, and it just grew naturally without really understanding what does it take to generate that revenue.
Gotcha.
And so if they don't have an expense line it's not mirrored to it, but it at least continues to go up as their revenue goes up, they don't really know how they're going to build an organization, because you can't have something in sales and only have one sales rep, right? When you see a company that they just come down to raising capital, and they think they're going to build a $100 million company with $2 million capital raise, right? And how are you going to get the money to hire the people that you need, right? And if they have a thing making a $50 million company and they still only have five employees, they don't understand anything about setting up the operation of a company. So so for a straight up looking at a company and where they're going and what they're doing, it's looking at their financials. If they understand seasonality, business model, and the expense it takes to generate the revenue, they understand that, then they're ahead of the game.
Okay.
And then it's the other part of it is, there's nuances of how they're going to market it, how they underestimate, that kind of stuff. But that is more that can be fixed, because that's a national. It's just really the startup mindset of knowing what I don't know. I don't know everything,
right?
But I went and got help on this. I went to an incubator. I got a mentor. I went to the Small Business Development Center. I did my research. I understand this kind of model. Its software is different than hardware and whatever, right? Consumer products. They understand their marketplace and how they're going to be successful. And so that is, so avoiding emotion, making sure you've looked at some of the best solutions out there. So who's competing in the same kind of a space. They're not competing with each other necessarily, but because they're solving a problem in a different way. And then really getting into the numbers, because the financial forecast tells a story. The business plan is the narrative that explains the numbers. And the presentation, the pitch deck, is the visual representation of that
everything.
Story.
Love it. I love it. So one of the things that you brought up is how most angel investors basically have deals almost spoon-fed to them, right? Because just how the system and the process is set up. So as someone who's considering to be a crowdfunding investor, how do I find the deals?
Okay, yeah. So there's dozens of crowdfunding platforms.
Right.
Okay. The ones that you would find, most of them are Reg CF. The big ones are WeFunder, Start Engine, Micro Invest, Republic. Those are the top ones you think. But then there's all kinds of niches. There's ones that are specific to cancer treatments. There's some that are specific to, different industries, environmental causes, sustainable. There's some that are specific to doing fixed term loans for traditional mom and pop businesses, right? There's just a litany of how people have used the crowdfunding platforms to create different mechanisms. There's ones for real estate, big real estate projects, all that kind of stuff. So part of it is figuring out what is it what you're going to invest in, and then I say go and create an account. It doesn't cost anything to create an account as an investor on these sites. Go in there, look around, explore it, and then you'll get emails of things that are happening. And you'll start to see there's a lot of exciting stuff, man. I wish I had more money, more
Right.
money and time, right?
Right.
So it has to, when you make a commitment to this, you're going to have to say, this is going to be my new hobby. And in Jane's case, she decides that she enjoys watching the entrepreneur videos more than she does the cat videos on her streaming on her phone,
Right.
or the political, whatever rants that people have. And, so she's like, she's excited because she loves the enthusiasm of these entrepreneurs, and she loves seeing the problems that they're solving. So she just, puts on her favorite playlist or her records or whatever, and she's looking at these at night, becoming aware of what's out there. And then, because of the way I teach the Angel Profitability Blueprint, you invest in some that are income producing, so you have patience. Because when you first decide, you're like, I just want to make an investment, right? That's where the emotion comes in.
Yep.
So you want to have some patience to be like, okay, I'm gonna look for whatever problem thing that I know. I love to camp. I wish there was a better solution for solar powering something, right? I'm going to go out there and find if there's what kind of solar power stuff. And it may be on a reward base, and you may do that, but then eventually they're going to come around and do equity, right? Because nobody can, if they're going to become a big company, that's where they just have to, it's just part of the thing. You just part of
gotta have
the
it.
capital stacks, right? So that, sign up, get familiar with what's out there. You can do Google alerts for certain topics or industry or things like that when there's press releases about something that you're interested in, and familiarize yourself. In Jane's case, she figures out she's got 20 grand to invest. And so, when you're not accredited, and for anybody that doesn't know what that means, it's the actual rules are $200,000 as an individual in a household for the last 2-3 years, and predictable nature that they're going to still have that same income coming out, and 300,000 as a combined income, or $1 million in assets, not counting your primary residence. And so it's the threshold in general is really not that hard, but it's really about liquidity, right? You can be making 200 grand or have $1 million in assets and got no money, right? And so, it's your liquidity. So once you figure out what you have, which I have a tool for that, is, and then, knowing you're going to, so unaccredited is max in a company is $2,000 and $10,000 in a year.
Okay.
So that's why Jane starts with the idea that she's going to, do 10 companies in 2 years, right? Under that model. She ends up not, because she does one where she puts a little less money, wait to see what happens. So, the story to be continued, I guess. But that's the whole thing. It's understanding what your specific intent is, and then mapping it out, and then just knowing, people that are stock market investors, they are in the stock market looking at stuff, preparing for it.
Daily.
Anything you do to do well, you want to develop your skill set for it and your knowledge of it, and then you can start to master it by doing it.
For sure. So you brought up Angel Profitability Blueprint. And this is going to be a two-part question. So what is the Angel Profitability Blueprint? And for an investor, because you talk about there's runway, right? And I've learned that you always need more time and more money in order to become profitable, within a business. So, two-part question: what is the blueprint? And then the second part of the question is it strategically? Hey, I might invest, say, $5,000 into this initially. Do you allocate, say, another 15 just in case? Because I know as an investor, this is going to take a little bit longer in case there is an additional need for an injection of capital.
Okay, great question. And then there's actually two different answers there. So
Okay.
the Angel Profitability Blueprint was something that when I started to build the course, and I was like, how do I teach people and tell them they need to do this? You got to figure out how you're going to do 10 companies. And I wanted to give the example of why, and 10 is sort of like the number that venture capitalists use, right? And so that, you're going to, in that particular case of the way they do it, you get one that's a 10x, two that's 5x, three that break even. My numbers right? Two that break even, and three go out of business. Something along those lines, right?
Right.
There's a mix, right? But the one that's 10x makes up for
The
the ones that
losses.
are
Yeah.
underperforming,
Yeah.
right? And in the end of the book, I use it as compared to a 401k. So I said, and I know that that a lot of people say three and done, like that's a thing in the angel investor community where they say, well, these investors get in and they do three and then they go, oh, I'm going to wait and see what happens. So it's like so the angel profitability blueprint works to try to factor in people's emotional idea about this, their behavior patterns of what, and to try to encourage people to stay the course, right? So that's why the part of the angel profitability blueprint, and in the book, I go through what is your risk, figure out your risk assessment of what mix of this is going to be. But 2 to 3 that that you're going to do that are income producing. So they're like buying into real estate.
Okay.
Because most people when they do a rental property and they may be collecting 2,500 in rent, but they're actually only keeping about 500 of it, right? They're not keeping a lot of that money,
right?
Because the mortgage and the property management and various
taxes
other stuff,
and all the others. Yeah.
And so if you think about if somebody was to put in, they can't do $1 million investment into a mixed use facility, but they could put $500, $1,000, $2,000 into somebody that's raising $1 million, and they get their share of that, right? And so they'll get some check every quarter or every month or something like that, so they know it works. Because part of the reason why people stop at 3 is they go, well, let me see what happens.
Right.
And that's sort of like a kiss of death, because you got to wait 5-10 years to get an exit, and you don't make any more new investments. Odds are you aren't making your 1x. Like,
right.
If VCs don't know which all are 10x's, so they don't even know out of this. They're just like, there's an element to like, let's see what sticks. It's
like baseball,
thing,
right? 3 out of 10.
And so that's the start. And then it's a mix of, are you doing pure early stage innovative, that's the greatest risk, or like I talked about, the Reg A plus, which is least risk because the company's got tens of millions of dollars or millions of dollars in revenue, they're already profitable, and they're raising capital to go public, right? So you do a mix of industry, stage, and type of offering. So you create a complete diverse portfolio in your 10, with the intention that you're going to continue to do another 10 and another 10 and another 10, right? But it's like that's how you build out a diverse portfolio: stage, industry, and structure of the offering. So that's the angel profitability blueprint. And I call it the West Coast model. Okay. That I talk about in the book, and Inside Secrets to Crowdfund Investing, is that and this is where I see it like this way. Y Combinator kind of came up with this model that says, we have a bunch of companies come in, and Sig Mosley kind of did this model too. We have a bunch of companies that are idea stage. So I'm going to give them a little bit of money, how much that is based on my wealth. I think in Sig's case, he would put like 17K into the companies that qualified for this program or something like that, and then you see what they're going to do with what they do with the money. Right. And so if they do what they say they're going to do, then they bubble up. And so out of, like, say you're an accredited investor, right? I'm about 170 grand. I'm going to do 17 into 10 different companies. Well, out of those 10 different companies, oh, guess what? One does really well. A few do like this. So then you follow on your money to the ones that are doing well. right?
Gotcha.
Okay.
Gotcha.
And so, and Jane does this in the book where she really just loves this one company. They're missing a few things. So she only puts 500 into it instead of the 1,000 or 2,000 that she was gonna. And because any company, and even if they do it, even when they're raising crowdfunding, this is the thing that a lot of entrepreneurs entrepreneurs and investors don't often understand. Depending on how much they're raising, it could take them 6 months, a year to raise all that money.
Right.
So where you are in the process, putting a little money in just so they can make their first milestone and do something with that money, and then they do it. And if they're communicating well with you, which is the other this hybrid, my podcast that just came out this week is about how to use your crowdfund investors to ensure you have the ability to raise the next round and the next round and the next round, right? So you put a little bit of money in, and then you put more money in because they're doing what they say they
They're
were going
gonna
to do,
do.
and they're telling you. And if they have a problem, if they encounter a challenge, they got to pivot. They're communicating with that too, because
Right.
it's not all rosy skies when you're an entrepreneur. And good investors understand that,
Right.
right? They know that you're going to have setbacks, and they want to know about it. So if they have somebody in their Rolodex, if they have the ability to give you more money, I mean, that was Sig's story when they had his big kind of and for folks depending on listening, that he's called the godfather of investing in Atlanta. He's invested in 100 some odd companies.
Wow.
He's had 80 something exits. He's had four or five IPOs. The one that put him on the map was the one that was, he was just telling us, oh, at my event, he said, he answered the question that it was 100x. I don't know. It was some huge X. It was
Yeah,
one.
I
It was
think.
25 years ago, and it
Yeah.
was the one that really gave him his nest egg to continue to build upon. Right. But Kieran Robinson, who was doing the questions with me, I didn't know this. He was her very first investor, and she told the story on the stage when they were having his kind of semi-retirement celebration, and she said, when I needed to make payroll, because she communicated with him, he
Right.
knew he would just say how much, and he would give her the money that she would, whether it became equity or he paid back a little bit
Right.
later.
Right.
But he trusted her to give her the money to be able to make payroll, because what she was doing was, and the way she communicated and the way she was thoughtful in the way that she built her business, he knew he could put more money in, and it was still good money after good money.
Right.
Right. So that's sort of the thing, that you need to understand when it comes to investing. And it's more, I talk venture capital people that have funds, and depending on where you go, you do want to have some set aside. It's called white powder. I was joking on the podcast I was doing the other day. It's like, why did they call it white powder? You know what I mean? It's like, and I use the example of skiing. You got to have there's like the hockey stick thing, right? And it's like, so what did the first investors, were they all into like winter sports? You know what I mean? It's
Right.
not just like what up with these terms, but
Right.
white powder is the capital that's set aside to come back in and invest. And so there's conversation you see in the news about venture capitalists not being as active, and they got so much white powder on the side. It's because they want to be able, the ones that they want to get through the tough economic times. They want to have enough money to go in and help the good ones.
Wow. So, and this is a perfect transition into my final question. The other day, I came across a video where a guy was explaining how he used specifically billionaires. How, and I don't know if it's true or not, but this is just what he said in the video. But he said that billionaires will basically create a fund of, say, $100 million. And of course, it's an interest bearing account that they put it in. And let's say it's given like a 7% return. And he says that they will take the interest off of this account and use it for philanthropic work. And so it got me to thinking as I was preparing for this conversation, I was like, wow, I think that's a smart, genius way to basically always have capital available for you to be able to invest into other businesses. Have you ever heard that? And if so, like what are your thoughts on that strategy or that kind of approach to it?
I mean, I have heard that from on the philanthropic side for
Okay.
sure,
Okay.
that kind of a thing. Because here's the thing, angel investors in general, it's not like they got their money sitting in a coffee can in the cabinet or anything, right?
Right.
You know what I mean? They have it in things that are making them money.
For sure. For
And
sure.
if they have enough of it to be able to, parlay that other into things that make more money, whether it's in investing in whether it's a philanthropic thing or that's where they have a big enough fund that they can have their play money for angel investing.
Right.
Some of them, I would think when the big exits like we do, I don't know for a fact, but like we're talking about sick, I'm sure, all that money
It's parked
was
somewhere making money.
someplace, and he
Yeah.
was, and you think about endowments with colleges,
Right.
they have an endowment and they're building buildings off of the interest
Right.
of that, right?
Right.
See, so it is definitely a way that you can, have that kind of, and there's some crowdfunding things that throw off 12% on a regular place under a debt type of a deal, and that you can, if you have enough in something like that, you can, use it that sort of same way that, but people, I know what in the first book, Inside Secrets to Angel Investing, and the story of Jack, I use the example that he would take his CEO corporate bonus. He knew he was going to get a bonus every year, and that was his angel money.
Gotcha.
Okay, so he had a predictable flush of cash, right? Or they have certain, they've stocks that they're liquidating, or they have real estate, they sell a real estate, they come in, or they have, there's just things that they have another source of, they put that to work into something else that's making them money, right? The ones that are building their portfolio.
Gotcha. Yeah. So for those who have not went and looked and researched or even got it yet, the name of the book is Inside Secrets to Crowdfund Investing. Follow Jane's journey, see how a new generation builds wealth with purpose, passion, and profit. If you will, Karen, let folks know how they can get a copy of your book or even connect with you a little bit more to be a part of whatever projects you might be working on.
Sure thing. So it's available right now on Amazon, and paperback and hardback and Kindle, Audible coming. And I'm working on getting it up in Ingram so it could be available in bookstores.
Okay.
So that's intended to be done before the end of the year.
Okay.
Because I want to be able to do a tour, for going down to independent bookstores and things around the Southeast, starting in the Southeast. And so that will be up on my calendar when that gets booked. Best way to reach me, we'll probably put it in your show notes,
For
but
sure,
if you
for
know,
sure.
bit.ly / little LINK for link, and then capital CCS for Compassionate Capitalist Show. That is all of my stuff. The book, there's a link to the book, both books there. There's a link to all of my freebies, the checklist I just talked about, the red flag checklist, the 12 Secrets of Innovation and Wealth that have a bunch of videos associated with them, all my social, my podcast, all the platforms that's on. So that's the best way. And you can, even book an appointment with me on there. So it's got that's the easiest way to connect. And my website's karenrands.co. So, but all of that's in the bit.ly.
Gotcha. So one last question. If you, for one piece of parting advice to someone who might be, they've listened this far, they're on the edge of their seat, they're wondering, should I take the leap and start investing, into businesses and entrepreneurs and their dreams and become a compassionate capitalist? What would your parting, advice be to them?
Okay. I'm going to use this as answer that with like my example of a story.
Okay.
Okay. So, if you wanted to go snow skiing, you could go out and you could buy the equipment. You can rent the equipment. You can, get a cute outfit, all that kind of stuff. You get a ticket. You can go up to the top of the mountain and you can go down the mountain, and you might get to the bottom of the mountain without breaking anything.
You might.
But it would be much better to get some coaching, get some lessons, and do this stuff and figure things out. Don't fly by the seat of your pants to do that. So that's what there's a lot of people out there on crowdfunding that, you could be successful if you do it enough time and you could learn and you're consistent with it. Jason Kakanis talked about that, which is part of my inspiration for the 401k versus for millennials, people just starting out in corporate world, crowdfunding versus the 401k. But, the thing to do is, first of all, get the first book. Okay. I mean, get this book, right? The Inside Secrets to Crowdfund Investing, and decide, is this something I want to invest time and money into learning how to do and investing this way? So it's intended to be like, yes, I can see myself doing this. And then the next thing is, whether it's through my training, the Compassionless Academy, or something else, or watching, or go get the first book that's a lot more detailed and denser and everything like that. It's like the Inside Secrets to Angel Investing. But decide that it's something for you compared to the other asset classes that you might know. I wouldn't recommend people jumping into crypto without learning about how to do that, right?
Right.
But, if you want to put your money to work, having impact, solving problems, helping the entrepreneurs that look like you, that you relate to, then, crowdfunding's the way to go. And as you build your wealth up, you can step up and be part of angel investor networks and be part of the bigger boy, bigger girl world,
Right.
all that kind of stuff. Or just have fun at it, as a crowdfund investor. But, decide, first step, yes, this is something I think I could see myself doing. And I want to, make sure I do it right. And so I'm going to go invest in myself to make sure I learn how to do it. So I don't learn by losing like those investors that I first met when I came up with the idea of these guys are compassionate capitalists.
Gotcha. All right. Well, that is a wrap. I appreciate you. Super grateful to have you on the show. I definitely learned a lot. And I'm definitely going to look more into your resources, your coaching program, and things like that. Because I think that entrepreneurship and business owners, like, we change the world. And so because of that, putting your money to work for you, to go out and have an impact. But of course, making capital. I mean, that's fun. That's life for me. So thank you for being a great guest.
I appreciate it. Thank you for having me on your show. I'm so excited.
For sure. Okay, that's a wrap on today's episode of the Disruptive Leadership Podcast. If you got value from this conversation, don't return to your life or business and keep doing the same thing. You must disrupt the status quo. Do something with what you just discovered today, or things will stay the same. And if our guest sparked an idea, challenged your beliefs about capitalism or even investing, or even if she opened your eyes to the opportunities in equity crowdfunding, take action now. And if you are a coach, expert, or a thought leader who is ready to transform your life or business into a well-oiled machine that multiplies your impact, income, and authority without burning out, book a Disruptive Leadership Assessment call with me via the link down in the description. And remember, whoever creates the best system to maximize results wins. Now go out and stay disruptive.